They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Kathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. Well, now, why focusing on your child's strengths rather than trying to fix their weaknesses is the best way to help them reach their full potential? Our guest is the Australian psychologist, Professor Lea Waters from the University of Melbourne. Her approach starts with the child, identifying the strengths they are born with and amplifying them. Professor Waters says the pitfall that many parents fall into is that we humans have a natural bias towards spotting the negative things in our environment, always trying to guard against what can go wrong, which keeps us out of harm's way but can be demoralising for children. She says the parent's job is to be present rather than correcting behaviour, looking for what they're doing right. Lea Waters details her approach in the book The Strength Switch. She is with us from Melbourne. Lovely to talk. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
You can see several reasons for the negative bias. As you say, we're innately wired to be surrounding or looking our surrounding environment, looking for trouble. But also we're just inclined, aren't we, when a problem's solved, to bank it and to go looking for the next problem to solve. And is that a habit you can fall into with kids?
It's absolutely a habit you can fall into. And it's not just a habit, it's the way that our brains are wired from an evolutionary perspective. Our brains were wired to notice the negative things in our environment, the problems in our environment, the risks, the threats in our environment way more quickly than noticing the things that are going well. And the reason for that, of course, is it gave us a survival advantage. If we had our ancestors out on the savannah sort of subconsciously, and we still do this from an evolutionary perspective, just subconsciously scanning the environment, where's the threat, what can go wrong, where's the problem, what do I need to fix, what's the error, because that ensured that we could survive. You imagine our ancestors who didn't have that inbuilt negativity bias probably didn't survive. They weren't the ones who had the early detection of the big beast about to jump on them, or the early detection of that little smell of the berry that it doesn't quite smell right. So the negativity bias is built into all of us. It's very helpful for problem solving. It helped our species to survive. It's not the most helpful function in our brain when it comes to us having a positive relationship with our children.
You still need it, but I think what you're saying is the need is to emphasise the positive. I mean, there's still the case of a kid who's about to run out on the road. There's still natural correction that needs to happen. The problem is when that's almost all of your feedback or a lot of your feedback.
That's exactly right. And that's why I called the book The Strength Switch, because it's not about avoiding problem behaviour in your children. It's not about denying weaknesses or areas that they need to fix, but it's about being mindful of how much of your time and attention goes towards the negative and switching your focus. And that has to be intentional because we are working against the brain's evolution. But it's just a pattern. It's just a habit that you get into where you look, you go to correct something and then just ask yourself as a parent, okay, what's going well in this situation? I'll focus on that first and then we'll get into correction mode.
And also just waiting to see if the correction is needed rather than it being the first impulse, just waiting and observing and holding back to see if someone or someone's, a group of kids can sort it out.
I love it. I love it that you said that, because we do give kids a chance. They will naturally self-correct in most instances. And even if they don't, there are some weaknesses and so-called problem behavior in our kids that we don't have to fix, because they're not going to end up limiting that child's happiness or success in the future. But we get caught into kind of correction mode as parents and think we need to fix everything so that these kids are like kind of perfect by the time we launch them into adulthood.
Let's give us some sort of age indicators of the way this behaviour can play out. Perhaps start with the younger kids, and then we might move through strategies we can use in different situations. But what's an example you would give where, out of the best of intentions, and perhaps without realising it, there's been a pattern of correct?
Yeah. Well, just to step back from the age thing, the underlying approach with the strengths, which no matter what age, even as an adult, for yourself, for your partner, for the people that you work and people who are in your life, is to intentionally look for what's going well first and look for their strengths. Everyone has unique strengths. So some people will be humour, some people will be kind of, they've got that great ability to step back and see the big picture. Other people, it'll be they're naturally athletic, they're creative, they're good at art. So that is universal. It doesn't matter at the age. But getting specifically to your question, for example, if you've got younger kids and you've got your two kids who are fighting, our natural temptation is like, stop fighting, stop doing that. And from a strength-based approach, what you would do is just take that little bit of pause and say, okay, I can see what I don't want. I don't want the fighting. But what's the positive opposite of that? What do I want instead? So instead of saying stop fighting, say, hey kids, how about cooperating? Like, where's the fairness here? Or grabbing one and sort of kind of saying, we need a little bit more kindness from you right now. So it's still addressing the behaviour, but it's redirecting it towards a strength rather than trying to correct a weakness.
This is interesting because that's actually reframing the correction, but
Yes.
the other matter is positively reinforcing good behaviour. I love the way you've got this phrase, strength blindness, we actually sometimes don't see it, again, because we've banked it. We bank the things that kids are doing well or the things that are good about them. So then it's a question of, and I'm interested in how you should think about this without it interrupting something that's going well. Sometimes silence and nothing and just letting people be independent is the best thing. But are you also looking for opportunities to reinforce good behaviours, just slip it in every now and then, and is that something else that you want to build into your skill set?
Yeah, look, these are really great questions, and you're right. So what you want to do is, in bad behaviour, that's when you use strengths to call forward the good behaviour. But when things are going well, it's just a blend. It's a blend of the moments where you want to acknowledge and praise and kind of call out. I love the concentration you're using right now, or I really saw, how kind you were towards your friend, or the diligence you put into your homework. So you're actively, intentionally naming it and acknowledging it. But other times it doesn't have to be that. You can overpraise a kid and it backfires. It's just supporting them in doing that. They'll feel good about doing themselves anyway, so they're going to get that internal feedback. And it doesn't always have to be verbal. It can just be a little pat on the shoulder or a smile, just a body language acknowledgement of, you're doing good right now, I'm happy for you.
And then when there is a point of correction, as you were telling us earlier, you can reframe the correction to look for the positive.
Call out the positive. And sometimes, and I've got a whole chapter on this on the book on strength-based discipline, sometimes it's a matter of the fact of teaching them how to use their strengths wisely. So my son, for example, who's 15, is very funny, and it's absolutely one of his strengths, but he gets into trouble at school because he overplays his humour. Now, there's certain teachers who love it and they understand, and there are other teachers who don't appreciate his humour in class. So in those kinds of conversations with my son, it's not so much about you doing the wrong thing. It's about, okay, you've got this great quality, but you need to learn when to dial it up and when to dial it back. And so that's a very different flavour of conversation, correctional conversation that you're having with your kid, because you're saying this is a strength. You just need to learn how to use it, rather than there's something wrong and broken in you and you're doing the wrong thing.
That is a really important situation, isn't it? And it's more nuanced than this is good and this is bad. This is about the sophistication of being able to read what's happening in a group or happening with another person and to modify to take that into account.
Yes, spot on.
Yeah. What of the downsides if we are in this pattern of behaviour? Obviously, we are looking to get the best and to help our kids to learn to get the best out of themselves. But what's some of the negatives? I hate to go there. If you are trapped in this, what are some of the results if you are trapped in just always going from one correction to the next to the next?
Yeah, I mean, it is a pattern and it spirals. And what it does is it just heightens the tension between a parent and a child, which then prevents you from having those genuine conversations that you need to have about problem areas and areas for improvement or weaknesses, because the kid feels like you're always correcting them. So they're naturally defensive and they're naturally tense. So you can't have those genuine conversations. Creates, hostility. It creates lack of trust between a parent and a child. Creates frustration from a parent's perspective. And this is one of the things when you flip it, and the work I do with parents and getting them to start to step back and see the good qualities in their children and the strengths in their children, is actually they start to see their children more holistically, and they have less anxiety themselves. Because when you're always in correction mode as a parent, it's pretty deflating. I mean, you're always seeing the things that as a parent are not improving. And so it comes back to this question of like, well, I'm not parenting very well. I'm clearly not a very good parent because I can't get my child to like put his bike away, even though I've asked him 100 times. but we haven't noticed that, the child is putting the lunchbox away or getting their homework done. So it actually relieves the parent. It creates less anxiety in the parent because they're seeing the good things in the areas that are improving. And it certainly dramatically improves the relationship between the child and the parent. And as you can imagine, the bottom line, which is what we want, which, as you said before, is that our kids grow up with a sense of inner strength, a sense of confidence. It's not arrogance. They don't grow up thinking, I'm strong, I'm better than everyone else. It's just a quiet sense of confidence.
Does it also create quite a negative vibe? It's not just the verbal, but the environment can be tense or can be negative without anything being said sometimes.
Yeah.
I am interested when you're working with people about their own psychology, and sometimes is this a classic case of the first challenge of parenting, which is that your inclination to fall back on your own experiences.
Yeah.
And do people have to reset their own way of viewing the world sometimes?
Yeah.
How do you take someone who is it's not a simple thing to just say, oh, okay, this is a good strategy, I'll just apply this. It's a little bit deeper with them. How do you work with that?
It is deeper, and it's really insightful for you to say that. I think, we do fall back on our old patterns, and it's just like anything. Honestly, it's like tying your shoes. It's like any form of behavioral or psychological change you want to make. You decide that you want to change what you're eating, you want to eat more healthy, you decide you want to go to the gym. It's the same process. It's making a decision. And then what I encourage parents to do and kind of map out in the book is don't expect to be able to do this 100% of the time, and don't expect that it's going to be that you're going to wake up tomorrow and be a strength-based parent. And so I kind of map out a little change process and say, all right, do it a couple of times a week, and do it in times where they're not tense times. Like in my household, I would never try and learn this technique when in the mornings, because I'm madly getting my son and my daughter to school, myself to work. It's not it's a tense time. So it would be unreasonable for me to expect to learn that skill. But I try and do it on the weekends because things are less tense. So block out some times during the week, identify a particular strength that you already know is in your child and focus on that. So set yourself up for little moments of success. And that's how we learn. That's how brains repattern. You just create situations where you are going to have those little moments of success. You learn it, you get into the groove, and then over time, those behaviors become more automatic, and then they extend. So then you can come back and use it in those tense times, like getting your kids ready for school in the morning.
It might not feel natural at the start, so, persist, I guess.
Yeah.
The other thing to do, and particularly in tense moments where it has spiralled into negative comment, what's the best thing you can do? Just stop yourself. Just stop talking even. Just everyone have a breather here, yeah?
Absolutely. Just reset. And again, in the book, I've got a whole chapter on mindfulness, and that learning that skill of just recognizing, okay, this is spiraling. Like this is just a really harmful or unhelpful conversation we're having right now. And just to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to go and get myself a cup of tea. I'm going to walk around the block. Can we talk about this later? Or vice versa, suggest to your son or your daughter, if they're the ones who are kind of spiraling, to say, you know what, we're not going to get anywhere with this conversation right now. Like, how about you just go off and listen to some music, get yourself a snack, get onto the PS4, whatever it happens to be. But let's just put a pin in it, and we can come back when the emotions are less heightened.
Is there a time to just sit down and think, actually, especially if you're starting on something or you're really consciously wanting to do this, just to sit and almost make yourself a mental list of the responses that will achieve, or the comments that might achieve what you're trying to achieve? In other words, thinking, how can I reframe our communication about this, as you say, ever persistent problem of the clothes being dropped on the floor or the bike not being put away? You can actually just sit down with a clear head and do a bit of thinking about what can I say to try and get closer to this goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon that's a great idea, and I would really encourage people to say, I mean, we all know what the hot points are in our own families, is to take yourself off, get yourself out to a cafe, have a little coffee, sit down and go and just map, like, these are my 3 hot points with my child at the moment, and here's just a 1 or 2 sentences that I can say that just reframe it differently, because when you start the conversation differently, it ends differently.
What are the what are that particularly challenging time around adolescence where, younger children are often looking for that and can be quite obvious in receiving approval.
Yeah.
You get a different dynamic around adolescence where there's the pushback coming. And how do you have to sometimes modify what's happening at that point? Or do you just need to interpret differently what the response is meaning? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are some of the subtleties around that time?
Again, that's another really good question. So in the book, I talk about the early years. You can be the strength detective. Like you can call it out, you can see it, you can articulate it. When you get into the teenage years, they don't want that. So rather than being a strength detective, it's more like just having your strength antenna out. So it is a more subtle process. And it's knowing your child and when it is. It's not that teens don't want it, because they still do, actually.
He's not going to tell you that.
They're not going to tell you, exactly. And you just have to be more tuned into the ways that you can do it. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about being a strength-based parent through communicating and through verbal, but there are other ways to be strength-based parents. And sometimes it's not about the words you use, but it's about the actions that you do. You know, and it could be just getting onto the PS4 and playing a game with your son or your daughter, or getting them out to shoot baskets, or taking them to a concert that you know they like. So what you're actually doing in that situation is you're not actually kind of articulating and being the strength detective, but you're being there with them, you're fostering an interest, and then it becomes more natural. You can be playing a video game, and just in the middle of that, you know, just really authentically go, oh my God, great teamwork. That was a great decision. You use great leadership. And it's just in the flow, so it's not as obvious to the teenager.
It's probably a good idea to have tried to have done some of this work before the teens as well, right? To sort of have a pattern going. And that brings me to another point, which is parents and caregivers agreeing on a parenting style, because I imagine consistency is pretty useful here when it comes to the key people in someone's life. Getting a really different set of behaviours from one parent versus the other, or a caregiver versus the other.
I mean, obviously that's the ideal. If you're co-parenting, or if you've got a caregiver, you know, if there's a team of people around that young person who are consistent. But I mean, in many cases, that's not realistic and it's not achievable. And I get that question a lot in the parenting workshops that I run, where one parent will come up and say, I really want to do this, but I'm not sure I'm going to get the same level of support. Or in some cases, you know, my partner does the opposite. What do I do here? And my answer is just, you know, practical wisdom. Like, yes, it's better if you're all on the same page. But even if they've got one person in their life, connecting them with their strengths, reframing their problem behavior, showing them in their times of challenge what strengths they've got to use, that's still helpful. That's still going to help build confidence and identity in this young person.
Thanks, Lee, very much. Lea Waters, and the book is The Strength Switch. She is an Australian psychologist based at the University of Melbourne.